9 o'clock in the evening, June 20th, 1944. The Philippine Sea is absolute darkness. No moon, no horizon, nothing below a pilot but black water and black air, indistinguishable from each other. He has been airborne for nearly 4 hours. His fuel gauge reads near zero. Somewhere beneath him are 15 carriers, 7 battleships, dozens of cruisers and destroyers. The largest carrier task force ever assembled. He cannot find any of them. He is not alone in this darkness. There are hundreds of men like him, circling, descending slowly, trying to pick out anything from the void. Some have already ditched. Some are in the water now, in the dark, hoping someone finds them before morning. Then, light. Every ship in Task Force 58 turns on simultaneously. Running lights along the waterlines, searchlights sweeping the sky, star shells climbing overhead, arcing and falling, blazing white against the black. 15 carriers, 7 battleships, scores of ships, all of them ignited at once. An entire fleet burning out of the darkness like a city that has just risen from the ocean floor. From a cockpit with a dead fuel gauge, it was the difference between the dark and the way home. That image is where this story ends. The question is how it arrived there. 30 months before that night, the Imperial Japanese Navy launched the most successful carrier strike in the history of naval warfare. 353 aircraft lifting off 6 fleet carriers in the gray Hawaiian dawn, hitting Pearl Harbor and shattering American sea power in a single morning. The men who flew that mission were the finest naval aviators in the world. By June 20th, 1944, most of them were dead. The men who replaced them were dead too. Shot down over the Philippine Sea the previous day, falling into the same ocean that now blazed with American light. The question is not who won. That much is already known. The question is how it became this catastrophic. How an institution built with such care, such discipline, and such genuine excellence ate itself alive across 3 years, and then sent what remained into a battle that confirmed what the numbers had been saying for months. 35 planes came home out of 430. This is the story of what happened to the other 395. Japan entered the Second World War with arguably the finest naval air corps ever assembled. The men who bombed Pearl Harbor, who sank HMS Prince of Wales and Repulse in a single afternoon, who destroyed American air power at Clark Field before the crews had finished breakfast. These were not lucky pilots. They were the product of a system that demanded years before it produced anything. 3 years, at minimum. Before a Japanese naval aviator was judged combat-ready, he had passed through a selection process that eliminated most candidates before training began, then spent those years accumulating skills that no air force in the world could easily match. The system worked. Even in defeat, Japanese aviators performed at a level that astonished American opponents through the end of 1942. The proof was in the body count, and in the hard lessons American fighter pilots carried home from encounters with veterans who had been flying combat since China. But the system had been designed for one specific kind of war, short, decisive, and won in the first 6 months. The planners who built Japan's carrier air arm had not planned for sustained attrition against an industrialized opponent that could absorb catastrophic losses and keep building. They had not planned for Guadalcanal lasting 6 months. They had not planned for the Solomons campaign eating through their best men at a pace the training pipeline could not match. They had not planned for what it would mean to lose a pilot who took 3 years to build, in a war where you might lose 50 of them in an afternoon. 29 pilots died at Pearl Harbor. That was more than a quarter of 1 year's graduating class. Not 29 replaceable men. 29 men representing a quarter of a year's worth of an irreplaceable system, and Pearl Harbor was a victory. Midway was not. In 4 minutes, on the morning of June 4th, 1942, 4 Japanese fleet carriers burned. Their aircraft were on deck, being armed and fueled. Their air groups, in many cases, went down with the ships, the veterans of a dozen battles, the men who had trained for 3 years and then spent 6 months proving it. Gone. The Solomons campaign finished the work Midway had begun. Japan committed her carrier aircraft to the grinding land battle at Guadalcanal, flying them off carriers and operating them from shore bases where they fought and died month after month. The losses were not spectacular in the way Midway was spectacular. They were steady, they were cumulative, they were unsustainable. By mid-1943, American pilots began noticing something. Their opponents were not what they had been. The skill was declining. The aggressiveness was there, it never really left. But the precision, the tactical judgment, the 1,000 small decisions a veteran makes without thinking, were absent. It was not imagination. The veterans were dead. The men now in those cockpits had trained for months, not years. They were doing what they could with what they had been given, which was not enough. The training pipeline was collapsing under its own contradictions. Japan's supply of aviation fuel was drying up as American submarines hunted her tankers across the Pacific. When fuel is scarce, flight hours are cut. When flight hours are cut, pilots arrive at their squadrons without the experience they need. The United States Navy, meanwhile, was moving in the opposite direction. By 1943, American pilot candidates were receiving 500 hours of flight training. Japan was cutting its hours. 2 lines on a graph, crossing each other, and every month they diverged further. By 1944, Japan was stripping flight instructors from its training schools and assigning them to combat units. Men whose job was to build the next generation of aviators, now filling cockpits that their own students were supposed to eventually fly. Japan was borrowing against a future it was simultaneously preventing from arriving. When a nation cannibalizes its training establishment to fight a single battle, it is accepting that whatever happens in that battle, the outcome of the war is already settled. Most of the men who would fly from Japanese carriers on June 19, 1944, had been given the minimum, trained in a hurry, and told to fill the space left by men who had been the best in the world. Some of them knew they weren't ready. They flew anyway. That is a different kind of courage. Not the confidence of the expert, but the resignation of the man who understands his position and climbs into the cockpit regardless. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa believes none of this is fatal. Or rather, he knows his pilots are less experienced than he would like, and he has a plan to compensate. Ozawa is not a reckless man. At 57, tall enough to be conspicuous in any room, his sailors call him the gargoyle, not without affection. He carries the reputation of the most capable carrier admiral in the Imperial Japanese Navy. He is innovative, thoughtful, attentive to his men. He understands carrier aviation better than almost anyone in Japan's senior command. He understands, too, that his air groups alone cannot defeat Task Force 58 in a straight fight. So he has designed a plan that doesn't require it. Operation Eigo rests on a single critical architecture. Vice Admiral Kakuji Kakuta's first air fleet, land-based naval aviation, operating from airfields across the Marianas, will go first. Hundreds of aircraft, striking the American carriers from the island chain before Ozawa's ships come into range. By the time Ozawa's 430 planes launch, the Americans will be degraded, their fighter strength reduced. And Ozawa's carriers enjoy one more advantage. His aircraft have longer legs than American planes. He can strike from beyond the range of retaliation. He can hit them from a distance where they cannot hit back. On paper, the combined strength of land and carrier aviation reaches nearly 1,000 aircraft. On paper, the plan is sound. Here is what Ozawa does not know. The first air fleet has been gutted. American carrier raids in the spring of 1944 swept through the Marianas airfields, destroying aircraft on the ground, killing pilots, burning fuel and ordnance. The authorized strength of Kakuta's land-based force is 630 aircraft. The actual number, after the raids, is a fraction of that, and declining. Kakuta has not reported his losses accurately. Whether this is deliberate deception or simply the failure of a man who cannot bear to say how bad things are, the effect is identical. The plan's entire first phase, the preliminary strike that was supposed to exhaust the Americans before the carrier battle, is built on a foundation that has already crumbled. Ozawa sails into the Philippine Sea believing he has an air force on his flanks. He does not. He watches his fleet put to sea and does not know it. June 18th. American submarines have tracked the Japanese fleet since it left Tawi-Tawi. Admiral Raymond Spruance, aboard USS Indianapolis, has known an engagement is coming for days. By late afternoon, Task Force 58 is concentrated near Saipan. Vice Admiral Mark Mitchell, commanding the carrier task force from the bridge of Lexington, wants to drive west overnight, steam toward the Japanese fleet during the hours of darkness, and arrive at dawn in position for a killing strike, while Ozawa is still beyond effective return range. His staff works through the numbers. The geometry is favorable. The timing works. Spruance says no. His reasoning: there remains the possibility of a Japanese flanking movement. If Task Force 58 drives west and leaves the Saipan beachhead exposed, a Japanese surface force coming from a different direction could fall on the invasion fleet, while the carriers are too far away to help. He has thousands of Marines ashore. His primary mission is their protection. Aboard Lexington, Mitchell's staff is barely containing their fury. Mitchell himself says very little, as he almost always does, but the aviators understand what the decision costs. Ozawa will have first strike. Japanese carrier planes will reach Task Force 58 before American planes can reach Ozawa. The initiative belongs to the Japanese. What neither Mitchell nor Spruance knows is that there is no Japanese flanking movement coming. Ozawa is not attempting an end run. Ago calls for a frontal assault. There is no Japanese force curling around to hit Saipan. Spruance is guarding against a threat that doesn't exist, but Spruance cannot know that. He makes the call he can make with the information he has. The fleet holds its position. The night passes, and in the morning, 430 Japanese aircraft lift off their flight decks and fly east. June 19th, 1944. An intelligence officer aboard one of the American carriers records the morning in his journal. We awoke to an ominously placid sea. The night had passed peacefully enough, but the morning dispatches carried with them forebodings of busy and hectic hours ahead. American radar picks up the first Japanese formation at 150 miles. The fighter direction officers begin working the radio. They know how many planes are coming, what altitude they're at, what direction they're heading. They begin vectoring Hellcats to altitude and into position. The Grumman F6F Hellcat is the answer to a question the United States Navy spent 1942 asking, how do we kill the Zero? Not by outmaneuvering it. The Zero is lighter, more agile, with a tighter turn radius than anything America had put into the air. The answer is to build something bigger, faster in a straight line and in a dive, armored against the gunfire that had shredded earlier American fighters, with self-sealing fuel tanks and 650 caliber machine guns that could tear through anything they touched. The Zero's range and maneuverability are its strengths. The Hellcat is designed to make those strengths irrelevant. Ozawa launches 4 waves across the Philippine Sea. Each one is met by Hellcats at altitude, radar-directed, already waiting. The American fleet's anti-aircraft guns put up a wall of fire using proximity-fused shells, rounds that detonate automatically when they pass close enough to an aircraft without needing a direct hit. Pilots describe the sky as looking like black popcorn. Formations that might once have pushed through the gaps take casualties from every direction simultaneously. The first wave never effectively reaches the American carriers. 69 aircraft launched. Most are destroyed before they get close enough to matter. The second wave follows and shatters. The third, The fourth. In the middle of this, 25-year-old Lieutenant Alex Vratsiu is airborne in his Hellcat from Lexington, climbing toward a formation of Japanese duty dive bombers when he spots them. And spots more than he expected. He goes after them. In 8 minutes, using 360 rounds of ammunition, he destroys 6 of them. 6 planes. 8 minutes. He runs dry and turns for home. He lands on Lexington's flight deck through a storm of near-friendly fire. The gunners almost take him for Japanese, and climbs out of his aircraft. He glances up at Admiral Mitcher on the bridge. Then he holds up 6 fingers. What Vratsiu doesn't discover until he is already back aboard ship is that his port wing had not been fully locked during the mission. He flew the best 8 minutes of his war, one mechanical failure from death. His wing could have folded at any moment. He stepped off his aircraft not knowing this. That detail belongs to no tactical history of the Turkey Shoot. It belongs to the history of luck, the ordinary, structureless luck that follows young men through wars and cannot be explained. An unnamed pilot, landing back aboard Lexington, says it to another pilot on the deck. Why, hell, it was just like an old-time turkey shoot down home. Lieutenant Commander Paul Bouy hears it. The name spreads across the fleet by nightfall, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. It captures something true about the asymmetry of the killing, but it misses something true about what was in those cockpits. These were not clay pigeons. They were men who flew a plan built on an air force that no longer existed at the end of a 3-year institutional collapse that nobody had managed to stop. They were not Japan's best pilots. Japan's best pilots were already dead. These men flew anyway. Out of 430 aircraft launched by the Japanese mobile fleet, 35 return. While the air battle raged above the Philippine Sea, something was unfolding below the surface that neither fleet fully understood for hours. USS Albacore had spent June 19th stalking the Japanese carrier force. Shortly after Ozawa launched his first wave, Albacore found herself in position for a shot at Ozawa's flagship, the Taiho, Japan's newest fleet carrier, commissioned just months earlier, the most heavily armored carrier in the Japanese fleet, a ship designed specifically and deliberately to be unsinkable. Albacore fires. A Japanese pilot named Sakio Komatsu has just lifted off from Taiho's deck when he sees a torpedo track running directly at his ship. He reverses course. He flies his aircraft into the torpedo's path and destroys it. He saves his flagship. A second torpedo strikes home. The damage appears minor. Taiho slows by 1 knot. The forward elevator jams in the up position. No fires are reported. Ozawa stands on the flag bridge of his new flagship and is confident. The ship was built to absorb this. The ship is fine. Below decks, the torpedo hit has ruptured fuel and aviation gasoline lines. Vapor is accumulating in the ship's interior spaces. A damage control officer, his name is lost to the record, identifies the smell and orders the ventilation system turned up. He is trying to clear the vapor. He is doing exactly what sound instinct dictates. He does not understand that he is instead circulating the vapor through every enclosed space in the ship, pushing it deeper into the hull, mixing it with air into a ratio that requires only a spark. The Taiho sails on for hours. Ozawa remains confident, then a spark, possibly from a pump, possibly from something so ordinary it leaves no trace, meets the vapor. Japan's most modern carrier, the ship designed to be unsinkable, detonates from within. Secondary explosions run the length of her flight deck. Black smoke climbs thousands of feet. She lists, slows, and begins to die. Ozawa is transferred off by destroyer and watches his flagship burn on the horizon behind him. The ship that was designed to withstand anything has been destroyed by the attempt to save her. The man who ordered the ventilation turned up was trying to do his job. He did it precisely. He destroyed the thing he was trying to protect. The same afternoon, USS Kavala finds the Shokaku. She has been in the Pacific since Pearl Harbor. one of the 6 carriers that launched the attack on December 7, 1941. She has survived Coral Sea, the Eastern Solomons, the Santa Cruz Islands. 3 years of the Pacific War, every major carrier engagement. Cavala's torpedoes end that in minutes. No American above the surface witnesses either sinking. The air battle is consuming every Hellcat in the sky. The submarines have struck and slipped back beneath the surface. The U.S. Navy has won what will be called the Battle of the Philippine Sea, and does not yet know it. June 20th. American scout aircraft search through the morning. At 4 in the afternoon, a pilot from USS Enterprise finds the Japanese fleet, 350 miles to the west. The range is extreme. Mitcher's pilots will fight at dusk and return in total darkness. Some will not return at all, simply because they will run out of fuel over open water. Mitcher launches anyway. The attack finds the carrier Hio and sends her down. 2 oilers burn and sink. Then the pilots turn east into the dark. They have been airborne for hours. Fuel gauges that were not full when they launched are now reading empty. The Philippine Sea at 9 in the evening is a void. No horizon, no reference, no visible surface. One American pilot has been aloft for nearly 4 hours. He has found the Japanese fleet, dropped his bombs, and is now searching for Lexington in the darkness. His gauge tells him he has minutes. The ocean is below him in every direction, and he cannot see it. Then the lights come on. Mitcher has made his decision. Every ship in Task Force 58 illuminates simultaneously, running lights along the waterlines, searchlights sweeping the sky, star shells climbing and bursting white overhead. The entire fleet, 15 carriers, 7 battleships, dozens of cruisers and destroyers, blazing out of the darkness all at once. Submarines in the area will see this. The entire principle of nighttime blackout is abandoned. Mitcher understands this. He gives the order anyway. From the cockpit, it must have looked like a city had appeared on the floor of the ocean. Pilots land on ships that aren't their own. Some ditch alongside destroyers and are pulled from the water. Some ditch too far from any ship and are not found until morning, or not found at all. Of the men who don't make it back that night, some are killed by the sea, not the enemy. They survived the Turkey Shoot and died in the Philippine Sea hours later, in the dark, having done everything right. But most of them find the lights. That is the order that defines Mitcher. Not the 4 waves of June 19th, but what he does in the dark, knowing what it costs. Because his pilots are out there, and he is not willing to let them die to preserve a fleet that has already won its battle. On the night of June 19th and through June 20th, Ozawa waits. He has ordered pilots with enough fuel to divert and land at Guam or other Marianas airfields. The silence from those bases, he reasons, means his pilots are down safely, dispersed, refueling, ready to regroup. He holds his position in the Philippine Sea. He does not know that Taiho and Shokaku are on the ocean floor. He does not know that his first-day air attack lost roughly 395 of 430 aircraft. He waits for reports that will not come from men who are already in the sea. The silence he mistakes for safety is the sound of mass death in the Philippine Sea. When the accounting finally arrives, when the silence is understood for what it is, the number lands with the weight of something structural collapsing. 35 planes returned out of 430. Ozawa submits his resignation. It is refused. Japan cannot afford to lose him. The Navy that has just lost nearly 400 carrier pilots, 2 fleet carriers, and the remnants of its land-based air arm cannot also release one of its 3 capable flag officers. He is too valuable to be let go, even in disgrace. This is not a mercy. It is a sentence. He accepts it with the same dignity he has shown throughout. He says very little. He stays. Japan's aircraft factories are still running. Planes can be replaced, not immediately, not in the numbers needed, but they can be built. Pilots cannot be built on any timeline that matters. The men who died over the Philippine Sea on June 19th were the last of the pre-war trained veterans, the survivors of Midway and the Solomons, the irreplaceable core of whatever Japanese carrier aviation still existed. The men who would replace them were already compromised, trained in months rather than years by instructors who had themselves been pulled from schools now emptier for their absence. The logic of this collapse leads somewhere specific. If trained pilots cannot survive long enough to deliver their weapons conventionally, then training is wasteful. What matters is the delivery, the bomb, the aircraft, the explosion against the hull. If the pilot cannot be trained well enough to survive the approach, then the pilot becomes the weapon. The training becomes irrelevant. Within months of the Turkey Shoot, the kamikaze program is formalized. It is not madness. It is the logical conclusion of a process that began when Japan found itself in an attrition war. Its training system was never designed to survive. The Turkey Shoot did not merely kill pilots. It changed what pilots were for. Meanwhile, on the islands of Saipan and Tinian, captured in the weeks following the battle, American engineers lay runways. Long, concrete strips capable of accommodating the largest aircraft in service. The B-29 Superfortress. Range, nearly 3,500 miles. Target, Japan. Within a year of the Turkey Shoot, B-29s are lifting off from Tinian at night and flying north over the Philippine Sea. The airspace above the Japanese home islands is empty. There is no carrier air arm to intercept them. There are no experienced pilots left to fly against them. The men who might have contested that airspace are 300 miles west of Saipan, in water 12,000 feet deep, where they fell on a clear morning in June 1944. And Jisaburo Osawa, the most capable Japanese carrier admiral of the war, the man who designed Eigo, the man who watched his flagship burn and submitted his resignation and was refused, accepts one final assignment at Leyte Gulf in October 1944. He is given command of a carrier force. 4 carriers, empty flight decks, no aircraft. The plan is explicit. He is to sail north and attract the attention of Admiral Halsey's fleet, serving as bait so that other Japanese surface forces can strike the Leyte beachhead while the Americans chase him. He is given ships designed to project air power, stripped of everything that made that power real, and ordered to sail them into battle to be destroyed. He accepts. He sails north. He does his job. He survives it, as he survived the Philippine Sea, as he survived everything the war handed him. He outlives the Navy he served and the empire he fought for, and dies in 1966 at the age of 80 in a country that had been bombed from the islands his battle was supposed to protect. The Battle of the Philippine Sea lasted 2 days. What it ended had been 30 years in the making. Japan had built the finest naval air force in the world for a war that would last 6 months. It lasted 44. The gap between those 2 numbers is measured in pilots, in flight hours cut, in instructors stripped from schools, in replacement, men rushed into cockpits they were not ready for, flying a plan built on an air force that had already ceased to exist. They flew east over the Philippine Sea on a clear June morning and met what was waiting for them. 35 came home. The lights came on that night because one American admiral would not let his men die in the dark. They were seen because there were men left alive to see them. The 395, the ones who never made it back to any deck, on any ship, under any flag, had no such light. They had only the morning they flew into, and then the sea.